people at the front there. So we're being live streamed today, so hello internet, hello viewers at home. And we also have Harry and Fiona, our BSL interpreters, who will be with us throughout the afternoon as well. So in terms of what we're going to go through today, in a moment we're going to watch a lovely short film about all of the work that we've been up to, made by the wonderful John Aitken, who is somewhere in the room as well. Wherever he is, I can't see him in the dark. There he is, right at the back there. So thank you, John, for the lovely film. After that, I'm going to come back on stage and talk a little bit about the kind of context of Bristol and Bath Creative R+D, why we did what we did. And after that, we'll have a panel of excellent people chaired by exec producer Joanna Lansdowne, and you get to hear from those wonderful people who we funded to make so many of the amazing things that happen as part of our programme. After that, we'll have a little break around 3:25, if my timing sticks. And then after that, we'll have a panel on responsible futures for R&D, chaired by Prince Taylor. And then Joe and I are going to say a few closing words at the end, and then the important bit, there'll be some drinks just in the first bit of the bar from 5 o'clock. So that's that. So I'm going to stop talking now, and I'm going to hand over to our projectionists to show you the wonderful film that John made, to just give you a good sense and a good flavour of what we've been up to. Thank you.
Which led to an even bigger question then of kind of, all right, so where can I create change in this program? Where does change come from? A really great example of early thinking around the power that we have to create change and kind of how we can apply our resources as long as we keep who we're trying to do things for at the heart of what we're trying to do.
There can be no one-size-fits-all approach here. And this is what inspired the creation of this Creative Climate Action Toolkit. This toolkit is for small creative businesses, practitioners, freelancers who want to act on climate but might be unsure about where to start or maybe lack the capacity to act.
Breathing Systems is a spatial performance that uses a wireless multi-channel sound system to spatialise my voice.
So we're working on a project called The Nightmare Market, which is a new horror experience that focuses on a slow and psychological approach to telling a story.
The funding that we've received for Lost Horizon has been absolutely crucial to everything that we're trying to do. We want this experience to be nourishing and fun and feel safe, and for people to feel like they can come and be involved and experiment with us on the journey that we're on.
At its heart, Stupid Cities is about the lived disabled experience of public space. The map is a way of seeing and geolocating microaggressions, and specifically where they cluster. We classify the microaggressions by risk and by different temporary design or permanent design features.
Wherever you are in the world, it doesn't matter where you are, you can leave a lovely message for your dad or your sister or your brother or your friend. And it means that it's like, for that patient, they've got you next to them.
We're very much in the research stages here, but we are interested in looking at how seeds move across the world and where they end up and how.
This is a Lagos lab, so be Lagosian, be as Lagosian as you want to be.
Each day we went through a different set of skills development workshops. We looked at things like mental health and well-being. We looked at kind of how you understand your creative neighbourhood and your creative ecology and how you build that and how you network.
This funding with Bristol and Bath Creative R+D has meant that we can really explore our own discipline and our own way that we make things and look to a partner who may want to come on that journey with us. So it has been incredibly unique and stretching. We really made some huge decisions. That's what this funding gave us, is that we were allowed to make these massive decisions about what this can be. And it has led us to understand that we can make this work.
collaboration between Boom Satsuma and Iconic Black Britons, it happened very organically. There is a lot of synergy between the two of us. We're very big on art, we're very big on education, and we're very big on representation. So immediately we just clicked.
Bristol and Bath Creative R&D funding has allowed us to explore what this platform can be and what it can't be. It's allowed us to test and fail. It's allowed us to innovate. It's allowed us to work at how we can make it more inclusive.
My very small goal is to create a seed of a project that other people can take on in their cities all over the world.
I think there are two main parties that this project has been for. One has been those of us working in festivals and in these organisations to think creatively and to work with new practices and really understand the context that different organisations around the world might be working with. Most importantly, this work has been for you, our audiences, so that wherever you are in the world, you can engage with the work that we're creating.
Wow, well, so thank you again to John for that amazing film, and hopefully that kind of gives you some sense of the kind of breadth and depth of the work that we were able to support as an organisation, as a programme. And really, you know, as we'll discover today, and as you'll see if you read the report, it's that kind of rich kind of mix of things that we think is the most important aspect, I think, probably of what we do. So I want to say a little bit about the programme and about why we did what we did and why we did it in the way that we did it, to hopefully set us up kind of for the rest of the day. And hopefully I won't talk for too long and bore you for too long about all those kinds of details. But before I do that, I kind of want to say a quick thing about what Bristol and Bath Creative R&D was and how it functioned. I'm not going to say too much about that because, you know, big programmes with all these moving parts and we've got all of our internal jargon and all that kind of stuff. But I just kind of want to give you a sense of the kind of activity that we're talking about when we say our projects and so on and so forth. So our focus firstly has always been on creative technology, and that's a term that we kind of use quite broadly, quite generously, to mean ways in which people get to experiment with new and emerging technologies, to make new and exciting things, to produce cultural work, to make us look at ourselves and think differently about the world. And some of those things might be products, they might be services, they might be experiences in the world, like plays, or they might be apps, experiences in the real world, in the outside world, I should say. It's a very kind of rich set of things. But that sense of the kind of the connection between the creative and the social and the people-led kind of task is sort of what was kind of at our heart. And during the course of Bristol and Bath Creative R&D, we made about 140 investments. So we gave out money of different kind of pots and sizes to lots of different kinds of activity, and that all ranged from smaller companies, small ideas, all the way through to kind of bigger, longer term projects, and also academic research into various different things as well, as I'll say more about in a moment. So the idea was to kind of put lots of resource into the system. We also tried to create an environment to do that represented our kind of core values, which is what I guess I'll be talking about in a moment. So we offered business advice, time to carry out research, and supported all our participants in different ways to showcase their work as well. So that's a big part of it, you know, to kind of make sure not just that people were making things in isolation, but they were connecting with other people who made things too, and that we were sharing them and telling the world telling the world about the things these people were making. So you might kind of pick up throughout the day or throughout the afternoon a few terms. Don't worry about them too much, but I will kind of quickly outline them now just so you can kind of get a sense of what we talk about when we use them. So one of the big ways we kind of organised these investments was around things called pathfinders. And these were essentially sort of themed explorations around a particular area. And within that kind of umbrella, if you like, that term. We funded fellows to carry out all sorts of different kinds of research, whether that was academic or research into kind of improving inclusion and diversity within a particular project, businesses, all sorts of people, just to help us really understand that theme. We also funded prototypes, which is another language you'll hear, which are the bigger projects where people kind of made things and really kind of got into kind of taking an idea of theirs off the ground. And so if you hear words like digital placemaking, expanded performance, amplified publishing, or here and there, those are the names we gave to those kind of those themes. So just if you hear them, that's what that is. We also funded smaller scale projects through a thing called our Trailblazer scheme. So those are smaller amounts of money for quicker, more responsive projects for those people who didn't kind of quite fit into that Pathfinder framework. And as I mentioned, we funded lots of academic research and professional research into such a wide range of things, from our Climate Emergencies Toolkit, which you'll hear about more later, through to ways of thinking beyond capitalism for the creative economy, all the way down to kind of measuring user engagement during virtual reality kind of experiences. So we tried to get a well-rounded sense of things. And hopefully you got a sense from the video of the scale of that as well. So on the one hand, our remit with Bristol+Bath Creative R+D was fairly straightforward. So we wanted to create an environment for universities, creative businesses and creative practitioners to experiment in making new and exciting things. And we wanted to bolster how and where creative work to make those things was carried out and supported within our region, the Bristol and Bath region. So you could see this as kind of broadly speaking as how things get made, who makes them and for whom, and then where they get made and where they get consumed. But this isn't quite as simple as it seems. So our interest in technology, obviously at this particular moment in time, brings us into contact with some very thorny questions. So here's a little bit of an exercise for you. How many people in this room trust Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg? How many people in this room use one of their platforms? Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, there we go. And so what this kind of demonstrates to us is a kind of tension within our everyday life. We are using these kind of technologies often and we feel we're not in control of the architectures that actually kind of define and shape our lives, and often how we get to use those technologies as well. Yet we also recognise that these technologies can and do drive how we live for good in both positive and challenging ways. So we're sort of in the middle of this kind of complex tension. And you see this kind of drive towards these particular kinds of technologies that that's coming from particularly the UK government. We see this in the Creative Industries Sector Vision, which was announced in June, which talks all about creativity in terms of innovation and R&D and jobs and cash, but not necessarily meaning or social value or magic. So this is where we start from. A policy around cultures of creativity and innovation, the foreground money-led, extractive forms of technology, extractive in terms of data, extractive in terms of time and attention, that involves models of work that not everybody can participate in, which exacerbate inequalities and which makes work by only some people and for only some people to consume as well. So what can we do? And these were the questions that we kind of asked ourselves. So we asked, what if we could support people, businesses, artists, creative thinkers, academics, to use new and emerging technologies in ways that reclaim their potential future uses for a social good? And this doesn't mean that the outcomes of what we supported all represented activism in and of themselves. I was about to say that there's lots of fun to be had, actually, but that may sound like activism isn't fun, but let's not go there. But we made all sorts of different things. But what we were really interested in was the way that things get designed and made. And so we had to ask ourselves, what do we need to take into consideration? The planet, the people, the technology, its impact? We also had to ask ourselves who gets to use and develop these technologies. So we know a narrow group of people have access, people who look like me, have my level of education very, very often, have access to dominant creative markets. Those are people with a social, cultural and financial capital to both pass and survive in that world. What would we need to broaden the sense of who gets to be creative, or rather, whose creativity gets to be valued and recognised in that space? And who is that work for? Who are they making it for? And how can they take part as well? And that was a big question for us too. And then there's the question of where. Where does this stuff happen? So we were funded as part of an initiative called the Creative Industries Clusters Programme. And we are incredibly grateful to our funders, the Arts Humanities Research Council, who gave us a lot of space and time to actually experiment with all these different ways of doing things, which is not something every funder always enables. So we're very grateful to that. But clusters, the term cluster it's an economic language. So it speaks in terms of exchange and productivity about like-minded industries who group together in geographical locations to bolster one another's success by both local competition and collaboration. So it's kind of like a way of working that you just go, well, I'm a geographer, right? So we used to learn it like, you need to have your factories next to the river or next to the canal, next to the railway, because all the goods can come in and out there. And so they cluster in that kind of term. And it kind of goes back to some quite basic pragmatic things. But we kind of understand that the world doesn't quite operate like that. So what if we were looked at that question differently? What if it looks like an ecosystem, so not a cluster, but an ecosystem rich in ideas and possibilities, peoples, places, and crucially hope? Where might these ecosystems reside? And what might they be needed to support their health? Places to work, places to connect. And that ecosystem thinking is really central to what we do. It sounds very often just like a metaphor, but we've spent many years, pioneered by John's work particularly, kind of thinking about how ecosystems are more than just metaphors. They're a way of building together people, places, connections, exchanging values of different kinds. And that's really important because often we talk about exchanging value in terms of money. That's the currency. I pay money to go to the cinema in order to have a wonderful, exciting, dynamic, beautiful cultural experience. But it's not, and then we talk about that and we share that and we talk about amongst ourselves, but it's not rated in successes like that. It's normally rated in successes that money kind of can put on that, so box office returns and so on and so forth. So what are those other kinds of values that float around the ecosystem? What matters? What matters to people? And when you start thinking about communities of practice, people who are doing, broadly speaking, the same work, have the same goals, you find that people are willing to share ideas, they're willing to be generous, they want to learn from one another, they want to pass opportunities backwards and forwards between one another. So it's not just money that might get exchanged, but it's opportunities, it's ideas, it's well-being, and it can be care. So these commitments were kind of what drove us to kind of make better creative technology by supporting a richer and more representative ecosystem of makers and audiences that sought to not only think in terms of money is important, it is often incredibly important, but also social good. Money didn't have to be the only thing that mattered, and we can support that while supporting other values too. So what you'll read in the report and hear from our panels today is the story of our attempts to create that kind of environment where this could happen, this hopeful environment for creative innovation. And a space where we can make space for experimentation, where there's care and there's compassion built into the system, where you can look after what's being made and look after who's making it and let yourself be changed along the way. Now, it's not been easy at all. We worked through COVID. We were profoundly affected by things like the Black Lives Matter movement. We saw the growing inequalities and equities at work in this country and across the world. We had to ask what we could do in that kind of context as well. So we had to kind of hold ourselves to account along the way and kind of ask some really difficult questions of ourselves about how we improve the way that we worked to be welcoming and open to the most people, because improving access isn't just about kind of getting people through the door. You have to change the house that you're in as well. So, but we were under no doubt that we had to try and do that. And our report contains our learnings about doing this. So in there's links to toolkits we've developed to help others who might want to be doing this kind of work. There's examples of the people who we supported, and again, you'll hear more about this afternoon, and lots more. So we really hope that by a commitment to a way of working that is reflexive, adaptive, and the foreground is the questions of people, inclusion, planet, generosity, and care, we can make a better world in which to make culture and be creative. And it's been quite a few years. So hopefully that's kind of giving you an oversight of kind of an overview of sort of the kind of the heart, I guess, of the project and the kind of questions we wanted to kind of tackle. I mean, we could talk endlessly about particular kinds of political intervention or statistics, and you'll see in the report that we've codified some of these things in terms of kind of the things that we had to for the funder, because their funder also necessitated that. So jobs, job created, connections, all these things. That kind of metrification is really common to projects like this, where you have to put, if not a value on it, but a number on everything. Whether you're receiving Arts Council funding or this kind of funding, there's always some way in which you have to account for yourself. So we were really keen to try and be able to demonstrate success on those terms, and if you have a look at the report, you'll see that I think we did, but also lots of other things that matter, which actually demonstrate that you can deliver those normative things while still doing that in a different way. And we've made mistakes along the way. We found it hard, we found it rewarding, and it certainly feels more like 10 than 5 years in some respects. And I've only been director since April, so God knows how John feels. Yes. So, but we are proud of the work we've achieved, and it is down in no small part to the amazing team and all of our amazing people that we've had the pleasure of investing in as well. So I'm going to stop talking now, and I'm going to hand over to Bristol+Bath Creative R+D's exec producer, Joanna Lansdowne, who's going to introduce you to our first panel of the day.
Simon called me Joanna. No one ever calls me Joanna.
I don't know why I did that, sorry.
Hi everyone, it's great to see you this afternoon. My name's Jo Lansdowne. I've been executive producer of Bristol and Bath Creative R+D. I'm part of the Watershed team here, and I'm really delighted to introduce you to our brilliant panel this afternoon. Just let you all get a glass of water, but I'm going to start by asking you just to introduce yourselves, if that's okay. We'll go down the line like this. Paul.
Well, it's very nice to be here, to be part of this celebration at what is maybe not quite the end, but towards the end of Bristol and Bath Creative R+D. Rather than sort of talking to you about my titles, I think we're going to talk about say a little bit about what we're enthusiastic about or interested in, what matters to us at the moment. So I guess the things that I'm interested in at the moment, well, one of the things is ways in which immersive technologies can support people to imagine alternative or preferable futures, maybe to do some social dreaming together. And that might be about all kinds of different futures, for instance, climate futures. And so I've been exploring, coming out of Bristol and Bath Creative R+D, ways of participatory futuring and ways that communities can get involved in co-designing futures. And I'm also excited about ways that that I guess creative technologies, different creative approaches can get people involved in decision making about their places, about their neighbourhoods. And I'm also, and this is not really a new thing, I'm consistently interested in science fiction and speculative design, but at the moment I'm interested in ways in which communities, people, might write themselves into narratives about the future, narratives that they perhaps tend to be excluded from, and ways in which those can intervene in perhaps or disrupt some of the kind of big tech or corporate imaginaries. So yeah, those are some things I'm excited about.
Hi, my name's Nick Rawlings. I might be a little bit more specific, I'm afraid. I'm a singer and composer and artist, somewhere in between all of those things. I'm currently doing a lot of work in immersive music and spatial sound, and my involvement with Bristol and Bath Creative R+D came with my project Breathing Systems, where I found funding for an idea I'd had for a very, very long time, actually. I got really interested in composing spatial music for voice while I was studying at Brighton, studying sound art there, and then realised that you graduate, and unless you continue in institutional settings or in commercial spaces, that you're not really particularly going to find it easy to work in spatial music. So I devised an idea of using my community. I was in queer clubland at the time, and using the bodies of my peers to place speakers on and spatialise sound through movement. And I'd always wanted to make a live version of this idea using wireless multi-channel transmission. So I found the funding in 2021 on the expanded performance prototypes pathway, and developed that system and developed a performance with a group of 10 performers wearing this speaker array, and sang through and on their bodies, and they spatialised my voice through choreography. That's also a system that I've used further for workshopping and kind of community co-creation. From my funding, I've developed a career in spatial composition. I was on residency in Egypt and Scotland this year, composing a new vocal and multi-video work with an Egyptian artist. We delivered that in Alexandria and Glasgow this year. I'm establishing an immersive sound studio in Bristol that's now built, and I'll be offering residencies. And I've also taught at UWE on spatial sound composition. So my involvement with B&B was really helped me to bring my career back to life after COVID. I often say I'm a fangirl of the project, but it was a really generous and impactful piece of funding for me. So yeah, I'm a spatial audio gal. That's me.
Thanks, Nick. Hi, I'm Fozia Ismail. I run Somali Feminist Art Collective with Ayan Ilmi, and yeah, we basically explore Somali nomadic practices and Black feminist material cultures in our work. So that also includes sound, it might include food, weaving, to kind of create alternative spaces for Somali women to gather, really, and to kind of heal as well from the onslaught of climate change. So it's, yeah, we're really interested in some, like, the way in which Somali nomadic practices are so amazingly resilient to how people survive climate and adapt to that. But we really, with this funding, so we were giving trailblazers, and I think that was so, it was wonderful to get we had an idea around weaving and songs from a previous project where we worked with some elders, and this amazing elder, Fatima, came in and had woven us a beautiful tapestry, and she used the tapestry as a song sheet, like a sheet of music almost, but so explained that that's how the patterns have been passed down thousands of years. It's passed down through song. So we're really interested in that kind of alternative knowledge systems and knowledge transfer that is nothing to do with the written language or even technology, really. It's like an old form of technology. But what we did with Trailblazers is we thought it would be wonderful to connect a tapestry with the musicality of some of those really old folk songs. So where you touch the tapestry and a piece of music or story comes out, and that's what we did with it was audible tapestries, and then that went on to become House of Weaving songs, which is a really lovely installation based on a Somali nomadic home. So yeah, and that's touring, which is really exciting. So it will be going to Eden next spring, So Eden are really interested in the way in which those old homes are built through plants, and so it's going to be really exciting when it goes and sits in different landscapes. As part of Counterpoint's Platformer Festival. So we're really excited for that. But it started off with this little pot, which is, so I'm really advocate for little pots of money that are easily accessible to allow people the freedom to research and develop ideas without any pressure or outcomes. So, thank you.
Thank you, Ozia. Joe.
Hi, so is that okay? Hi, I'm Joseph Wilk. I'm a digital artist. I primarily work with programming code, exploring forms of expression that work with alternative bodies. A lot of my work is around exploring patterns of marginalization, usually around disability, and also taking a disabled-led perspective on technology, often deconstructing it and examining the systems and structures that create the broken tech. I'm really interested or really fed up of the way that disability is often fixing pre-existing technology that's already broken and already socially harmful, and I'm supposed to make it accessible. I'm more interested in disabled joy and disabled-led voices that try and deconstruct the technology, even if that ultimately fails, to create something that's about the disabled experience and the disabled identity, and the joy and the difficulty that experience has. And I guess Stupid Cities was the root of all this work, which has continued and developed through projects at the South Bank Centre, creating digital street art, and also now continues running in Leicester at the Attenborough Art Gallery, working with SENT schools and children's hospitals to use the wheelchair movement to express yourself and how space makes you feel.
Thank you all so much. So I've got a few questions that I'm going to ask, but then we are going to have time for questions from the audience, both in the room and online. So if you're hearing things that you want to know more about, or you've got a question, just do kind of bear it in mind, and we'll come to you in a little while. But we've heard quite a lot already about the idea of R&D, and Bristol and Bath Creative R&D is obviously the name of this project. So I wanted to start by just asking a couple of you kind of what does R&D mean for you and your practice, and what might it mean particularly to do it differently? Fozia, can I ask you about that first?
I think research and development, I mean, it's just having that for us. I think with the Trailblazers, it was really that quick money that turned around for the application. The turnaround of the funding was really quick, which was great because it enabled us to have a period of research time. So we went off to a Welsh farm and met this amazing guy called Hamish, who's just had so many Somali weaving and had worked out there and was a photographer, and also allowed us to work in the community and interview elders. But there was no real, we didn't feel any pressure for any particular outcome. And I think that doing research and development differently, I think for us that was really pivotal to allow us to kind of start off with a kind of question, which was basically, can you incorporate sound? What are the best ways to incorporate sound into a traditional Somali woven tapestry? And to see if we could just do that and experiment. So we had experimented with conductive thread, copper wiring. We're not very I don't feel very techie as well, so it was great to get a bit of money where it's this is it's a creative technology project, but it doesn't really feel like a creative tech project. So but really it was a way of just having some space to really experiment, to read, to go and visit and chat to random people, really fascinating people, and to kind of inform, our work. And so it really, that deep kind of bit of work that we did was really, I don't think we would have got any other funding pots if we hadn't had that. And we got Arts Council after Trailblazers. We applied for the Sandbox, Playable Cities, and we got that. And we, which was great for us because actually we're emerging artists and we're not really, we don't go for big grants normally. But having that that time, just without any pressure of any outcome, was really, it felt really freeing. So I think that's how you do, for us, I think, research and development differently.
And Jo, it's fair to say, are a bit more techie.
Yeah.
What does R&D look different to that for you, or what's your kind of process?
Yeah, so I guess I approached initially on the outset R&D as a techie person, still working as an artist, but tech-led. I think what research kind of and development gave us was, or me and the people we worked with, was feeling uncomfortable, kind of existing in an uncomfortable moment. A lot of our work was working with disabled people who experience disability, and that de facto state is that what's defined as reasonable by law for access rights for disabled people is very fluffy, and the experience of living that myself for like most of my life, not really being valued by the systems and the things that are supposed to help and protect you, means that to challenge that kind of marginalization is uncomfortable. It's difficult. And I think what we really did with the R&D was exist in that moment of discomfort, but with a community of people brought together with some sense of having a spark or energy to kind of have something we could do in that moment, something that we could ask questions, and a lot of the tech all disappeared, which is great because tech is about people. And what started to reveal was that the project that was about tracking aggressions and microaggressions and bad design became about disabled joy. I say it again, that people wanted to express themselves. These things made them unhappy. They wanted to share with a community of people, and they wanted some disruptive but beautiful and creative way, using their own movement and their own bodies to say something. And that was, we quickly discovered that we could tell people that they had a mobile phone in their pocket and it was recording their location, and just pretend that, and then they got the same experience as if they had the phone in their pocket, which again I think is now my litmus test of any technology project I work in. If you can tell the person to pretend that the tech's there and they get the same thing, that means the tech is the right level.
Interesting, yeah. Or maybe you don't need the tech at all.
Yeah, maybe you don't. That's scary.
We'll come back to that. Paul and Nick, I'm going to ask you a really similar question, but I guess I'd be interested to hear from you if being part of this kind of ecosystem of this project, I guess, changed what R&D meant for you in any way. Do you think you do R&D? You might do R&D differently now to how you might have done before. Is my thinking? Is my yeah. Who wants to go first?
I think, firstly, I came into this really as an artist, and I'd never led a large R&D project before. So I learned a huge amount through that through the grant process. But what the funding enabled me to do was to build very quickly, prototype and build the system that I'd had in mind for a long time, and then really focus, kind of as Jo was saying, on like the relational and community-led ways of using that system as a composition and performance tool, and then start to really think about, what it means to compose and perform in immersive sound, to build communities of listenerhood and performance in spatial. and to think about, you know, creating works that don't just centre an individualised consumer and actually address the way that sound builds community and builds space between and through bodies. So I think in a funny way, you know, the process enabled me to really focus on conceptual development and bigger picture things, because it just gave me the platform to have the initial kit, you know. And then through all of the workshops that I've done more recently with different groups, you know, that each time I do that, there's a different use with each group, you know, and I learn something about the system. And, you know, I've been able to support artists to actually make installations and performances of their own as well, and each time I kind of learn something new. So it's enabled me to really open up how I think about my own practice by giving me the platform of the tech. Yeah, it's that. I think we can. Yeah. Give it to you then.
Thanks. So yeah, I mean, one thing to say, I suppose, is that you know, looking back, Bristol and Bath Creative R&D, and I was on the Pathfinders came up earlier, and I was on the digital placemaking Pathfinder, which is actually the first Pathfinder. But a couple of kind of new projects for us kind of came out of that Pathfinder and out of Bristol and Bath Creative R&D. And they're both projects that, I should say, were made in collaboration with uninvited guests and also with Duncan Speakman, who I think is here in the room somewhere. Yes, at the back, hiding at the back. But so one of those was a project called Future Places Toolkit, and that is an augmented reality engagement activity for planning consultation. And the other is Future Soundings, and Future Soundings uses an app to take you on a walk into the future. So you're walking not just through space but also through time, and as you walk there's prompts which encourage you to write a kind of science fiction story for your place, and when you come back together we gather again, and you hear the collective science fiction that you've written for your place, and you hear that performed with an improvised immersive soundtrack. So those are two pieces that have come out of Bristol and Bath Creative R&D for us, which we're still making and still developing, and doing so in a really iterative way, in the way that Nick just described. Also sort of testing them with different communities and in different contexts, and adapting and making changes to them in light of that feedback. But I suppose a couple of kind of key things that have come out for me. So one of those is, you know, coming into Bristol and Bath Creative R&D predominantly making kind of artwork for art and technology festivals, or for theatres, or for arts and cultural contexts. And through Bristol and Bath Creative R&D, we've kind of shifted to actually applying these approaches in community contexts. And, you know, for instance, Future Places Toolkit is we're now working with Bristol City Council, and we've been running Future Places Toolkit with the community in Knoll West on Philwood Broadway, imagining improvements to their high street. So it's becoming part of a kind of real world planning consultation process. So we're starting to apply it in a kind of civic context. And with Future Soundings, we're working with DEFRA at the moment, and exploring ways that can be used to imagine preferred futures for people's local river, and to get people involved in the decision making around the management of their waterways. So that's a real radical kind of shift for us. And another shift, I suppose, for me is around kind of working in a way that involves co-design, and working in a way sort of making kind of iterative changes to the software and to the the approach that we're taking that's responsive to the communities that we're working with. I mean, being a little bit critical about that, what I would say with for instance, Future Places Toolkit, looking back, ideally we would have brought communities that we're making that approach for. We would have brought those communities in much earlier to the kind of co-design process. So that they were involved kind of throughout that process, rather than kind of adapting the tool that we have and the software and the facilitation approach we have, rather than adapting it later. The communities would have been involved earlier on in that co-design process in ways that they really tend to not be when software is being developed. And then I suppose the other thing that's really significant for me coming out of Bristol and Bath Creative R+D has been the work that happened with Everyone or Consequential, and the work that Alex Mecklenburg did with us around responsible development, and thinking about the intended and unintended consequences of the software or the creative technologies that you're developing, and thinking about that, you know, for you and your collaborators, and thinking about also the consequences, scanning the consequences for the communities you're working with, and also the unintended or intended consequences, for instance, for the environment and for society more broadly. So that's been really important to me, and those are kind of approaches that I've also kind of taken into my kind of teaching, and I now use those approaches. I do consequence scanning with my immersive art students on the MA that I run. So
that's nice to know. I wanted to pick up on what you were saying about you were being quite honest and being kind of a little bit critical of some of the processes that you've used in the past, and you've all talked about elements of kind of co-design and working with communities through your work, and I think that we know that structures of kind of R&D and innovation can at times make that difficult, and I wanted to ask a little bit about that, I guess. Joseph, maybe I'll come back to you to think how kind of beginning to work in that way, in the way that you were talking about. How has that been? And I guess what might have been some of the challenges, and how are you trying to respond?
Yeah, I think when trying to tackle something massive like you said, like the problem of access is, and the whole project, the problem is legislation, and that's where you fix it, kind of done. But living in this moment that we have now, it requires that we have these small pots of money to effectively deal with the fact that the system is not protecting the people and is not working. And so any intervention we have are these small little moments in like a drop in the ocean of the problem. And during the research project of the phase, I discovered the term careoism, which is a combination of care and terrorism, by Cassie Thornton, who coined this term. That this idea that care could actually be harmful when it kind of comes. I mean, let's take Stupid Cities comes, says like, hey, we can like do something about these accessibility problems, let's talk about it, and then kind of like goes away because our funding stops. And then I still have conversations with people in the project of like, oh yeah, I've still got these things going on. It's kind of like, but we don't have any money, so we can't do any of these things. And I love the idea of saying, hey, this is like I said in the video, I think in a seed of a project, and you can take it and you can do it, but people need money to do that, and I don't have the money. And the system is marginalising them, and they have to try and exist in that space and find the money to do that. It's difficult, and I think about this every single time I do anything, and try at least plan for the idea that there should be long-term care in any project, and do as much as possible, even if ultimately that still requires some money from somewhere to facilitate that being picked up.
Fozia, how are you grappling with those questions?
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult one. I really hear what Joe's saying about like parachuting projects in. I think for us, I think the difference is we've always worked with community. So so we centre community and we centre our elders, but it's very intentional. We work with Somali women elders, we work with Somali women, and we say that's what we do. Like, you know, we're not necessarily broadening it out because we feel like they are a group that's kind of been ignored for a long time. But I completely hear what Joe is saying, because I think that you've got these groups of people across the city that, you know, and also lots of people have a very odd relationship to the university or institutions. So there's just a fundamental lack of trust, because there's all this research that is always happening. There's all this, you know, so I think for us, it's really important that we just go in, it's like me and Ayan, we're just coming in. Would you like some Somali tea? Let's go for a breakfast club. You know, we get to know people really, really slowly, but we're also really clear from the beginning about what we do offer and what we don't offer. And the women we work with, you know, kind of have to want to do it for us to get anything done, otherwise it wouldn't work. But we do also, specifically, we do donate, we do pay for time as well. Even if it's just a small amount, we still, just to acknowledge their contribution. And I think that's always been difficult with institutions, to understand that actually I don't think it's right to do research or to work with communities in workshops where people's time isn't valued, even if they're not employees or workers or freelancers or whatever. But there's a different way in which, you know, people extract knowledge from marginalised communities, I think, and then that's just, personally, I think I've always found that wrong. So we've always designed, you know, we work with design justice principles, which is really, you know, I think working with people in a really honest way and seeing what their needs are. But also, you know, we try and keep the design quite simple for projects. So things like the weaving projects that we've kind of gone on to do, it's people who've continued it themselves, because we can just provide the materials and then they can continue it. So it's the idea is that we're not trying to design stuff that's relying on us. It's relying on a knowledge share within the group of women that work together. And so I think that's been quite radical in terms of, like, we still get calls from people going, we've done this now. When are you guys, you know, like last week, Zainab was like, when are you guys coming back? We've got all our weavings done. And I'm like, we're going to come back and visit. And, you know, we've got to kind of do a bit more research on that element of, I guess, a really interesting thing about, you know, futuring that Paul was referring to, you know, this kind of dreaming and this futuring. For us, it's kind of the opposite. It's like we're going back into the past to give us the ground in which to do that futuring. And that's partly because these are really old practices, but they're being lost. So for us, a lot of it is actually going back into these kind of nomadic systems and ways of understanding the world and learning about it, and so that we can, you know, do some of that future work. So I think it's really and the you know, the fact that people are on a different land to what they grew up with, the fact that the plants are different, and the fact that that meant that for a lot of people, some of the elders we worked with hadn't woven in 40 years. That was the first time they, you know, the skill set was there, but they hadn't picked it up, because in their head, you don't weave just for the sake of it. You weave to make a house, you know. So learning about that has been really fascinating, and the need to have spaces for people to kind of connect up to a different way of existing on this planet that I think is actually really inspiring, and it's definitely created a real, I don't know, a kind of healing really for us. You know, that there are old ways of surviving, because these people have survived on really difficult, barren landscapes forever, you know. So so it's really been great.
Yeah, I mean, maybe when we think about futuring, it's useful to acknowledge that time isn't necessarily linear anyway.
And also just, I think it's really important to what Fuzz is saying about, the need to look back in order to be able to move forward and to have the kind of capacity to anticipate how important the kind of looking back is also dealing with the past. I mean, the one thing I just wanted to quickly say about the sort of process that we're kind of talking about, it's a process that takes time, and one of the, co-production and co-creation, they're pretty trendy words in funding at the moment, but I think it's really important that funders think about the kind of structures that can support the sort of co-produced and co-created and co-designed work that we're wanting to support. And for instance, as just thinking about the expectation at the point at which you submit a proposal for a project, there's the expectation that you have a carefully honed question. It's a nice focused question, and there's the expectation that you have a kind of coherent proposal, and it's thinking, I suppose, well, what are the kind of funding structures or application processes that could support kind of co-produced research where research is able to be co-researched and the question is co-designed with the communities that you're researching with and for, and addressing what matters to or the challenges that have arisen out of those communities, rather than for instance, a technology challenge that the researcher wants to address.
I mean, kind of relating to kind of immersive performance, we're talking about kind of a community of producers and artists and musicians. If you're looking at what's happening with immersive technologies on a performance level and immersive venues, there's a huge amount of proprietary, kind of black boxed, venue specific immersive tech that's being developed. Think about like the Dome, and that's just opened in America, and a lot of it kind of slightly misses the point of the value of immersive for a start, in terms of it being kind of very kind of spectacle and forward facing, but also as young artists or early career artists, that's a completely inaccessible space to get into. All the production is like highly specific to each space, so you're only going to get artists at a particular level or of a particular ticket value into those spaces. So something I'm thinking a lot about is, how can we build systems and tech that's really easily accessible for those at the start of their careers to start building into these spaces, and also for delivery, standardizing and making accessible immersive systems for delivery. And I think we in expanded performance, XR or VR or immersive, we're like yet to hit the like Ableton point where everyone can just download one bit of tech or buy one bit of kit, and we know that's going to be a universally accessible thing. So I guess in my own practice there's like a slightly different community at play, and the co-creation in my practice is maybe a little bit accidental, and in my practice there's much more of a direct kind of like composer-performer relationship, but I think that there are kind of issues around immersive of just relying on these like economies of spectacle, of scale, that are inherently exclusive, deeply tied to regenerative capitalism, and boring. If something is really expensive, like there's a large tranche of people doing really amazing things that are not going to go and experience it, much less make work for it, And I think for music that's really the next challenge.
I really like what you just said about taking it down almost to the bare, but like what is it that's necessarily what what is it that's essential to making your creative piece without necessarily and I think that's a really important question for how we create and what kind of models are going to be sustainable, and how you can use some really simple technologies and have a really beautiful immersive event, experience.
I mean, early grime was all written on PlayStation games, right? People are, communities will find the tech and retrofit them to their needs, but can we maybe just be a bit intentional about, designing this stuff from the ground up with that strata in mind instead,
Yeah. Or can I?
Yeah, you jump in and then we'll come out to the audience for questions.
Yeah, I was just going to say that we alluded to that the technology might not be needed. I think context is critical in any form of tech because it's often used to hide social problems rather than fix them. When you go to a community of people who are having difficulty with their lives and say, hey, we've got this tech thing that enables you to express yourself, the context is so phenomenally important. And I think that is massively missing sometimes in co-design of understanding the system we exist within and how the people might feel about the things you're presenting to them.
Thank you. Okay, now is your time to raise your hand. Yes, in the middle, then over here.
Sorry, don't worry about the mic, I'm sure you can hear me.
We've got people online who won't be able to hear you if you don't use the mic, so thank you. We'll wait.
Hi, my name's Paula. Joe, you said a brilliant thing just now. In fact, you said it twice. You said joy.
Oh, I thought you were looking at me, Joe.
No, it's you. You can say joy as well. As creatives, we are surely the providers of joy in other humans. So it's a very big question, but what is your metric of joy, and how can we make that metric as important as the metric of economics?
In this system, we can't. How I measure it, it's a very emotive thing. I would quantify it with an example of we had a participant in a wheelchair whose brothers and sister didn't use wheelchair, and they had to step aside and let their wheelchair brother take the lead effectively. And the joy in his face of this being about him, for him, and everyone else had to step back and give him his space. I think that feeling for me is what I assess when I try and evaluate that joy. I think it's pretty apparent when people are feeling joy in an activity they're giving them, but it doesn't have monetary value. I don't know how to help there other than the fact that programs like this value things other than money.
And we tend to be quite careful about what we try and count, because I think you have to, because as soon as you start counting something, and that's not to say that we shouldn't, of course, try to make really rigorous and robust arguments about different forms of value, and we tell stories about it, and it's important to kind of try and go beyond that. But I do think there's a danger in terms of what happens to an intangible concept like joy as soon as you try to count it, because then people will start, as soon as you've quantified it, next time we apply for funding, we'll be asked at the funding stage to tell how many numbers of joy we're going to produce. And that might not be the best way. Yeah. Thank you for the question, they're interesting. I think there was another one over here.
Hi, I was also going to ask about joy, but I'm not now, but I'm really pleased that somebody else did. Firstly, thank you very much. It was great to hear, and I've seen a couple of the projects and love them both incredibly, so thank you for sharing. Part of the project has been about thinking about ecologies and clusters, and I wondered if this process had helped you or challenged you perhaps in seeing yourself differently in the ecology of Bristol specifically, or Bristol and Bath, and what your learnings are in that, and how you might now be thinking of yourself as a cog, a particular cog perhaps in this machine, and how you might be taking that forward, how you see your role in our cluster and ecology.
Okay, can I jump in?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been hugely transformational for me. I think I just found support and like care. That's maybe a dangerous word to use, but friendship and professional support and development, and the kind of trust that I was given by granting me what was honestly, I thought, a completely bizarre amount of money for the project. I wrote the budget and I just thought, no, it's not going to happen. And being given that trust to run through and develop and do this project I'd had in mind for 4 or 5 years, and that sense of, like huge reward at the end of it, really brought me into Bristol. I wasn't living in Bristol during the pandemic, and also the community around B&B has been so inspiring for me, and I basically now work as a creative producer part-time, and I'm really pleased to give back some of the experience and knowledge that I've gained through this process. So I was given a platform, and I just really felt that I wanted to become like an active part of this community and this ecology. So yeah, but it's been really impactful on that level for me, yeah. And hopefully now I can help spread that impact beyond my work as well.
Yeah, maybe this is not so much about a kind of wider ecology, but more about the experience of being one of the fellows on one of the Pathfinders. Was, I think there was a lot of kind of peer support, and it did feel very much like being part of a cohort, and among us that we had quite different expertise, different backgrounds, different experience to bring to bear, and there was a lot of exchange and kind of skill sharing and the opportunity for that. So I think within the programme we very much did feel like a community of practice, and I think that has been taken care of and kind of nurtured and grown in such a way that that now I would hope that the ecology is kind of stronger, and that those exchanges and kind of the skills sharing is not just happening among those on a single Pathfinder, but happening more broadly with the creative technology and the community here in Bristol and Bath.
And does anyone want to say anything? Does anyone have thoughts on kind of connection out into a wider ecology, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I guess I don't feel like I'm kind of internationalist, I would say, at heart. So I'm Bristol-based, but grew up in London, and nomadic, I would say. So I don't feel, I guess the ecology, what ecology I connect to, I wouldn't say it's in place or in a particular. So I don't know. I find that question quite challenging. Actually, I don't know quite how to answer that, if I'm honest. But I feel that there is. I think when we're working with our Somali elders, I definitely feel like I feel very connected then, but I think for them, even though some of them have lived in Bristol for 40 years, they still refer to the landscapes back home. So like back home is always a big. We're always aware of what's going on back home, so I feel like it probably fits into the here and there theme a bit more. So I'm here, there, everywhere. I don't know what ecology I fit into, or we fit into as Taqan, but we're interested in how we can connect different. Everyone sings across the world. The House of Weaving Songs isn't particular to Somali culture. There were weaving songs in Britain. There were weaving songs everywhere, where there were people working on land and making things from plant materials, because it's laborious to make rope. And I don't know if anyone's made rope. I have out in Somalia, and it's boring and takes a long time. So you need to, you need to sing to pass the time. And so I love that idea that actually humans haven't changed much. We might have all the tech and we might have different ways of telling that story. So for us, as part of our practice, we really enjoy using kind of the technology, but to actually tell a very basic human story, which is everyone sings, pretty much. And that's a lovely thing for us to kind of connect to. And also everyone sings when they're connected to land, I feel. And that sometimes that connection to land is a bit lost in conversations, because we still need to eat. Someone makes our food. We're still we're still animals. We're still part of this the ecosystem, the natural environment. So it's, yeah, we haven't changed that much, but I feel like that's lost when you're not grounding yourself in that a little bit, and all of this other stuff I feel sometimes is a bit of noise, particularly at the time in this really difficult kind of climate crisis that we're living through. It's all noise really. So that's what I would say on that, maybe. I don't know. I feel like that went off piece there.
Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, sure. I think I feel connected to people within Bristol, but not the city. The city is the noise that I have to pass through to get to the people. I trust the people. I trust the Pervasive Music Studio and the Watershed, and were this on another venue, maybe I wouldn't be here. So no, but that trust is important, and this is an example of building that trust.
We've probably got time for one more question at the back there. Hi.
Hi there. I think going back to what Simon said right at the start about the question of do we use Facebook, or and do we like the people who make it and their ideas about the world, and have you encountered times when the technologies that you've had to use or been wanting to use, or for instance, I make video games, I use something like Unity, which is a 3D development tool. Unity invests and works with the American military, which is not a thing I enjoy about that tool itself. Has there been times when that has those kind of things have come up with working with creative tech? Because when we say creative technology, we're coming back to oftentimes these big producers where we've got who make the tools that we then go on to use. Has that come up?
Constantly, always. Yes. I wouldn't. Prior to these projects, I would have used the word reclaim, and now I no longer use that because it's impossible. I like deconstructing, and again, I said I deconstruct technology, but again, it's impossible to reconstruct something. It's a constant evaluation. I think the way I frame it is that technology is really interesting and exciting, but the people who control it are not, and are often their goals are not connected with the people who use it. And at least discussing that is, again, accepting the reality of the world we're in and the fact that we engage with platforms which we don't trust. So there are conversations to be had, and technology can facilitate those conversations. And I guess I have an ethical standard to tools that I would use, and I try and use open source things. There are some things I wouldn't use, but I feel like that dialogue and that discussion is really valuable, because to not have it is to lead into the kind of black box of technology that everyone is using without thinking. So, good question.
I think I maybe spoke to this a little bit before, but I think that I really don't enjoy that some of the major innovators around immersive performance or immersive experience are Facebook, Meta, deeply capitalist platforms and that we think often about immersive tech as being something that you do with headphones on, isolated away with your eyes behind a screen. And I think I would really like to see much more intentional and concept-driven and community-driven immersive tech that focuses more on collectivity in an honest way that isn't mediated through capital and that isn't mediated through individualizing that experience, and that really activates the social in an honest and genuine and generous way. And I think there is a real lack, certainly in sound and music at the moment, of tools that enable that. And also just from a performing point of view, can someone please make a performance software that isn't tied to looping, and give me non-linear performance tools that I can, easily use and don't need to use Max MSP. And, there's access issues around, programming and stuff for a dyslexic ADHD person like me, right? So I'm aware that I'm like speaking to much more specific issues in my answers here, but I think generally I think it's about removing marketing and capital and individualism from immersive experience, and that's something I think about a lot in my work. Yeah,
I think this has kind of come up a bit really, and Fozzie was talking about this also. I suppose maybe it's partly about thinking about projects that are not tech-led, but where the tech is facilitating, in a way, kind of what we want to do, and for instance, gathering people or imagining or telling stories, or song, and passing those on. So maybe, thinking about Fozzie's project, but also thinking about future soundings. For instance, the technologies used are not necessarily like sophisticated. They're the technologies that are to hand, or they're using perhaps they're using technologies that are in a way kind of not in themselves innovative, but they're repurposing those technologies, combining them, bringing them together in a kind of in a way that is inventive or kind of imaginative, but facilitates like people's experience, facilitates bringing people together, telling stories, or in our case, kind of imagining futures. But maybe that's something I'd like to see shift a little bit, is to see the kind of to see arts-led tech innovation where the innovating of the technologies arises out of the creative needs and imaginations of the artists, and kind of what it is that we want to do, or the behaviours we want to kind of explore, or the ways we want to kind of bring people together, the stories we want to tell, and how we want to engage people with them. That it's that kind of drives the innovation, rather than in a way being responsive to what can I do with AI? Because there's these, funding opportunities around it that we kind of need to respond to. Not that I'm not interested in doing something with AI,
Design the tech around the speculative future we want, not what tech can be demonstrated to do and how we sell it.
All right, that sounds like the line to end it on.
Sorry.
Thank you so much. I'm so proud that you were a part of this project with us, and really honoured to have your trust. Thank you all. We've got a 15-minute break now. So there's tea and coffee out of this door in the first part of the kind of Watershed bar, and come back here at 20 to 4. Thank you.
Okay. That was really good. That's fun.
we're going to get started again now, so I'm going to grab a seat. Whee. Great, thank you. So 2 more bits of pieces this afternoon. So we're going to start off with another panel discussion, and again just take this opportunity to thank the panel we've just heard from. That was an amazing discussion, which really captured all the kind of micro and macro things that we talk about when we think about Bristol and Bath Creative R&D and the kind of complex kind of world that we created for ourselves, but also a sense of the joy and the passion as well that kind of is kind of inherent in the amazing people that we supported to kind of do things better and shape the world and be willing to kind of ask for that change. And then after we've heard from this next panel, we'll be doing a little bit of a wrap up, a few thanks, and then it'll be time to go to the bar, which is always everybody's favourite sentence, I think, of one of these kinds of things. So I'm going to hand over now to the wonderful Prince Taylor, who's going to come and tell us all about who's on his panel and welcome them to the stage. So thank you, everyone.
I'll sit closest to him then, shall I?
Yeah. We'll go in order of them.
Hello everybody in the room and everybody online. Yeah, my name is Prince Taylor. I was one of the digital placemaking fellows. So yeah, kind of got to know the Bristol and Bath Creative R&D project as it was being born, I guess, if that makes sense. If anyone was there at the beginning, they'll know what I mean when I say that. Yeah, and I got the pleasure of hosting this panel, which is quite a fascinating one in that, in true pervasive media studio style, the end is full of loads of new beginnings, right? So I'm joined by these 3 incredible people who've had massive impact on the way that I look at my work, from very up close and also from quite far as well. So we have Tony, Zoe and Jill, and we are going to take a look at some of the work they did, but also try and model how this research and development project really built community around some really important themes that we all consider to be work, but they're also ways of living. So I'm going to ask my panel to introduce each other, which is going to be fun. So starting off, we have Zoe introducing Jill.
Hello everyone, this is Jill. Jill is, I think, first and foremost a designer. And by that I mean someone who is deeply practical and goes, okay, what are the problems and how do we fix them? And is also a person who does lots and lots of different things and works in lots of different ways, but ultimately brings that way of thinking to all of the different places and people that she works with. On Bristol and Bath Creative R&D, she was working on business development, so supporting kind of all of the different people and small businesses kind of develop their work and then go to the next stage of what they were doing. And I just really admire that Jill is so deeply practical and so deeply values-led, and has taught me a lot about how we can rethink growth and how we can look at the values about the better world that we want and actually try and do it. So I hope that gives a bit of an introduction into who Jill is.
Isn't that so nice? I want people to talk about me like that.
Can I do Tony next?
Yeah, please.
Let me introduce you to Tony. Tony came into the Watershed and this project halfway through as an inclusion producer, which is no easy thing to do, to just sort of end up in a space where everyone's already busy doing stuff and then orientating yourself and going, okay, how do I do what I'm supposed to be doing here? But this man did it, and has been really amazing in building on some of the groundwork that was done on inclusion, notably Zara Ash Harper and her work, and then picking that up and working by thoughtfully attending to what's going on and how people are and how they operate, to then work on a level of inclusion that's pragmatic and also, you know, deeply connected to the truth and to the reality of working together. And that's one of my pleasures. So I got the chance to be the person that worked with Tony developing the tools alongside, and that was a real thrill. What's really interesting is that he can operate without KPIs and also invent them. And that he built with the team, I mean, the whole Watershed team, this inclusion toolkit, and then took it to a variety of conferences at different scales and continues to explore how that toolkit works over long term, in an hour, in half a day, in all sorts of contexts. So that's really magical to see how this work unfolds. That's
Thanks,
Tony.
Jill. That's really lovely. I'll pay you later. Thanks, Matt. Last but not least, we've got the wonderful Zoe Rasbash. Zoe is our climate emergencies action researcher. I've written it down because Zoe's work is so amazing that I didn't want to get it wrong or not account for it all. So Zoe joined us partway through the programme, exploring the intersection between climate action and creative industries, practically supporting how creatives and creative organisations and freelancers and SMEs might be active participants in combating climate change or the climate emergencies, both in how we operate in our day-to-day work and in our kind of bigger strategies and things like that. Zoe's work incorporates how art and creative tech and creative practice can be used to enable action in thinking about climate change and the climate emergency. That's going outside of awareness raising to strategically thinking about how art and technology can be tools to enable change and participation. That's my formal bit. What I really want to say is I really love the way that Zoe can take something that could feel so heavy and often does feel really heavy and can make you feel really anxious and just turn it into something really hopeful. And I think it's a real deep skill in that. And I remind myself to think more like Zoe in that respect every day.
I'm blushing as well.
Thank you all for humouring me.
That was cute. I love it.
But yeah, that was really intentional. I really wanted to see what happens when people introduce each other, because there are loads of like liminal and visceral and ethereal elements to this kind of research and development that aren't measured. But they also go so far as to ensuring that people and communities around this type of work can sustain it and keep going. When you have your impacts that you have on other people reflected back to you, it can sometimes quiet the imposter voice in your head. And allow you to sit back into your more natural mode of being and get this work done, because it's not easy, right? So at this point, I'm now going to ask you to introduce the projects that you worked on or some of the more immediate outcomes that came out of the funding and opportunities the Bristol and Bath Creative R+D programme offered. So I'm going to start with you, Tony.
I made eye contact, that's right. So as Jill mentioned briefly, I'm the inclusion producer on Bristol and Bath Creative R+D, and it was a funny old thing because I came into it partway through with a remit to do some inclusion, as Jo mentioned, really wonderfully, and it's something I'm going to hopefully talk again about later. There weren't very many KPIs attached to that. I mean, that's not to say that I didn't have stuff to do, but actually got given a bunch of space and time to think about what this work could and should be, and there was resource attached to it, and there was kind of the capacity to think and the support of the team and the wider community and the Pervasive Media Studio to really get to grips with what this work could be and what it should be, and some patience for me to work that out, and it did take me a little while to work it out, but in doing so ended up asking a bunch of questions about the programme in and of itself, like in the most generous way, was able to be quite critical of our work and kind of ask a lot of questions about who it was for and why we were doing things the way that we were doing things in some cases. And it was those questions which I was able to turn around into. I was like, well, if I'm asking these questions and if this is something that I'm thinking about in my role, and I'm the inclusion guy, right? Other people out there who maybe aren't as close to this work or aren't thinking about it all the time must be asking these questions too, and they must be struggling with that too. So the kind of the work turned into a bit of a meta project. I love to complicate things, and was able to turn that into the inclusion framework for change. And that was a tool, kind of a strategic tool for people and organisations, either running projects or building products or trying to develop policy, to think about what inclusion means for those processes that they're building, and to really start to identify where change comes from in their processes that they're building. So trying to avoid it being here's a toolkit that's got 50 million suggestions for inclusion action, because they already exist and you can find those, everybody can use Google. But actually thinking about where to start without getting completely overwhelmed by it all, which I was on my way to doing, is a really great starting point for that. Actually, well, what can I do first, and what can I do in a little while, and what do I have to do later, and what do I need for that piece of work? So it's a real emphasis on kind of the elements for change and what you need to make change in that sort of a space. You'll hear me bang on about the need for capacity, resource and power quite a lot. There's a couple of t-shirts you can see. And yeah, so that was the output of kind of my work. Largely was this framework that people can work through to start asking those questions of their own work, to start thinking about what their own inclusion strategies look like.
Hey. I have a pretty similar story to Tony. I came in halfway through the project, and I think the context is, in 2019 it was a really big year for climate action, and lots of creative spaces and creative people made declarations, you know, signing up to a climate emergency, net zero emissions by 2030, and then obviously in 2020 there was another crisis, so we kind of forgot about climate change for a second. And then I joined this project in 2021 when we'd all started being like, oh, we probably need to start thinking about climate change again, and building it into how we work and what we do. And I came into this project kind of tasked with thinking about what would a framework for climate action look like for creatives in the Southwest. And I was like, amazing, yeah, I'll just do that. That's actually really hard to do, as it turns out, because the creative sector in the Southwest is so diverse, scales, what people do, what people's audiences are, how they work, the makeup of what they do is so different that I was like, feeling a bit overwhelmed. I think Tony, at similar times, we were like, how can we give everyone what they need? And a huge part of this process was actually learning from people like Tony and Jill, and thinking, okay, why do I feel like I have to be the one to give everyone what they need and be bossing everyone around, telling everyone what to do? And a lot of the journey was realising that actually pathways to climate action look really, really different for different people. So it's not about giving people a one route to change. It's about supporting people with the right questions and resources so they can figure it out for themselves, because I'm not going to be an expert in most people's creative practice, they are. So a big part of this journey was thinking about what are the questions and the resources and the tools that I can facilitate, that I can give people, that support them to figure it out for themselves, and support people to not get completely overwhelmed, but as Tony says, like, think about change bit by bit and what we have power over, and where we already know, like, how are we connecting with our audiences, or like already things that we're good at, how do we build on what we're already doing, to be more active around climate. And I say active around climate really intentionally, because I think, you know, the creative sector, we have to think of ourselves as really active participants in change. And so me telling everyone what to do is not going to make people active in change, but, you know, giving people the tools to figure out for themselves. And if I can, carving out time and resource to let them do it as well, because when people have money, they can do really great things. It creates much more kind of active, excited, empowered people who are not feeling overwhelmed by the climate crisis, but in, you know, a collaborative movement for change. Yeah.
Cool. Well, my work's the project I'm going to talk about is slightly different. I came into Bristol and Bath Creative R+D as the third business development person, which was a really lovely opportunity to be able to look at the cohort on the programme and go, how do we respond? What can we do? How can we support, basically, all the companies going through this R&D process, which is always fascinating to me. I'm a trained designer. I'm trained in curiosity, but also ambiguity and working out a path between one and the other. But part of what came out of this work was seeing again and again some fantastic R&D funding, some amazing ideas coming out in the way that this kind of spending gets people to look in spaces that no one else is looking. So not your corporates, they're not looking in this kind of free, cultural or sort of immersive kind of way into what technologies can do and why they should be doing things and what you can do with them. And so there's something, one part of the reason why I'm here is because I think it's magical what people can explore when they have this kind of funding. But what happens again and again and again is that there is the moment of funding and the coming up with ideas, and it's already been spoken about in the panel before. There's this moment where, where's the next bit of funding for the next stages so that people can actually carry on and take this another few steps further? Often it's through commissions, pieces of work that people get with other partners, and thank goodness for that. But one of the things that's been in the background for me has been this notion of the Silicon Valley model, that we've got this is an aspirational model for us, and that this is what we should be preparing these kinds of creative R&D groups and ideas towards. Because at some point, some investor's going to come down and say, you know, hey, I love your idea so much, I'm going to give you this money, and you're going to give me back 10 times what I give you. And it's just not going to happen, in my experience. Possibly 1 or 2% of the people that I get to work with can do that. But for everyone else, the trajectory is slower, they're not looking for hockey stick returns, and they're trying to build something of substance. All of the people we've just heard speak are talking about building something of substance. So a business form, but something that actually can sustain them in their practice, but also produce something more than that. So one of the challenge for me was, like, what's broken in this situation? And so I approached Bristol and Bath R&D separately to say, can I investigate this a little bit more? So they gave me some budget so that I could put some money from my company as well, and we could investigate it a little bit more. And we came up with a project called Hopeful Finance, which, as you can tell, builds on the back of this, and I wanted to do that really visibly. And the idea was we'd investigate what's broken about this system, where are the leverage points, and what can we do? And because I'm a slightly arrogant designer, I thought I could step into that and ask those questions. What's interesting is when you are a designer, people will actually slow down for you and tell you why. But I'll tell you a bit more in a while.
Thank you, man. It's so good. It's like just, yeah, incredible listening to you speak about the work you've all done yourselves, because I've read so much into it and I tried to stay abreast of everything through the stuff people put out online. Just going to do a little bit of admin. We started 10 minutes late. So I just wanted to ask people's permission, like, if the conversation does go on to 22, will you be all right with that? And if you're not, just at random points, like, just put your hands up and put a thumbs down and be like, no.
Oh my God, no.
Do you know, I'm taking responsibility. Like, if it goes badly, it's my fault. Don't worry.
I feel like I'm quite into it. Yeah. Just tell us when you've had.
But yeah, I just wanted to be conscious of that because I'm really enjoying listening to you speak, and I do want you guys to have the space you deserve to talk about this work. So yeah, reflecting on what you've all just said, the words like everything is existing, or I'm hearing everything in the space of change. We know what things are like now, we know how things could be, we know that there's a need for something to happen in between where we are now and where we could be. And as I mentioned before, like, the R&D project is coming to an end, like, imminently. However, there's something about the three of your projects which are sort of charges or challenges to take this work on forward. So I wanted to ask, like, three of you, real quickly, if you can, in a nutshell, like, tell me what for you, in relation to your work, is on the other side of change. This is my favourite part, silence.
Go on.
Just because I'm warmed up. On the other side of change is that Dakan Collective have revenue streams, and they have people financing them and supporting them, both from the community, from local businesses, and a range of sources, so they're not looking around for funding. So we've got some real tangible output from this project. Yeah, so that Joe can actually go, oh, there's a little bit that I want to go and investigate more. And there's a chance to support that, but also to help people build rather than just come to that edge and stop.
It's still sort of forming in my head, but I think is all of us understanding about how, you know, if we are going to act meaningfully on climate and make any kind of change, it is inherently collaborative and connected work, and we can't be using kind of environment or green stuff as a USP. It has to be done like deeply rooted not only with each other and sharing our resources and sharing our knowledge and all of that, but with like the community and building on the wisdoms of all the amazing climate activists and frontline defenders that have come before us and informing how we think and how we design what our future looks like, and really acknowledging that is just a challenge to the system in general, because the system wants us to all be itemised individuals, but this is a collective challenge. So figuring out how we do that in practice, I think.
Thanks. I'm going to give a half answer and say, after change comes more change. Woo! Fancy that. I mean, so the work of the framework is all around kind of this idea of continued change and make the change that you can make now, and then think about how you resource the bigger, different other changes later. And I'm kind of a firm believer in considering the needs of the audience, and I use audience as quite a broad term, kind of the people that you're trying to engage. Think about who they are and what they need and want from you, or the resources that you have to offer, or the engagement opportunities that you're building, or the product, or the performance piece that you're building, or whatever it might be, and then work backwards from there to think about how your resources meet their needs. And as we live in a world ever changing, kind of, you know, everything moves very fast these days, and so the needs of the communities that we're trying to serve change, and so what you are building for and towards those people will change, and so yes, more change comes after change. It's not a never finished job.
I feel like you needed like one of those like Marvel soundtracks. You know what I mean? It's like, it's over, but is it really?
Just my eyes flick open at the end.
I'm really fascinated, and it's because of the impact that the digital placemaking Pathfinder had on me, basically. There was a lot of moving through the mist in that process. And like, despite having the responsibility to start presenting some outcomes, actually, like, I think whether or not you're able to measure it now as a team, right? And when I look at the people who I was working with closely during that process, I see very clear outcomes of that first Pathfinder. They're very, very evident now. I hope you was able to get that stuff into your reporting. Thanks. But there's this thing of like taking things that are in process and trying to communicate them tangibly, despite them not being fully formed necessarily. So a little bit of what you're experiencing now, Joel. So I was hoping that you could share with us like up to 3 things that you believe are fundamental for taking what you've learned forward, if it's for yourselves or for the communities you do this work in amongst.
And you start with me.
I just keep looking at it.
So 3 things that are fundamental.
Yeah, for taking this work forward.
I think the fact that you can make what you need. If things don't exist now, someone at some... let's rewind a little bit. The system as we have it to use that phrase, and I've forgotten who said it, is perfectly designed for the results we're getting. Yeah? So if that system was designed, we can then design new components or new aspects of new systems. And so that's one of the things I take forward is, what does it take to get the right people in the room to redesign the systems or the components that can stand alone enough to get the change we're trying to get happening? Yeah. And in pragmatic terms, that means what financial advisor, what legal team, what members of the fiscal policy people, and people that are doing these kinds of projects, getting them in the room together to then explore what's possible. I mean, we've done some with experts, but it's also what can we do with the right people in the room as well. That's one big fat one rather than three.
And that feels like three. Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it. Zoe, Tony?
Yeah, so I think what the bit when I was introducing the work I did before, I should have said, by the way, that ended up in the creation of a creative climate action toolkit, which is on the Bristol and Bath Creative R+D website. Check it out. But that was kind of like, I think, like an initial exploration into kind of like, okay, thinking about how, the creative sector in terms of like our processes and how we make stuff and how we do stuff and how we, are, how can that be kind of more responsible, more sustainable? But I think that was the kind of grounding exercise, if you like, to think that, okay, if we're going to be part of like a broader change and think of like innovation or the R&D work that we do as part of something wider and looking, kind of taking our ecosystem and thinking about it in terms of an actual ecosystem as well, like how we're connecting with our region of in the west of England, which is just one of the most like active places for climate and biodiversity action in the UK. We're deeply lucky to be located here and to have all of that. And so our next step was thinking about that point I just made earlier about collaboration and how we become more deeply rooted and led by those who are already doing the work on the ground, and what does creative technology look like in that context, which I think sounds kind of random to some people, like creative technology and climate action, but actually when we kind of start talking about it, it was a thing that a lot of people were very excited about, and taking the tools that we have around design thinking, around creative approaches to inclusion, and going to active communities working on climate where we live, who can inform us like what change needs to happen, what work is already being done, and what happens when we put those people together in a room. And actually, that's what the project we've been doing over the last 6 months called Grounding Technologies is, and it's like basically a pilot project that helps us kind of root some seeds into something a little bit deeper, a deeper collaboration, longer term. And it's amazing what we've seen bringing those people together. It's beautiful. Like it's that's what R&D feels like it should be to me, which is like lots of people with lots of different skills coming together to be driven by their values. And so I would say like collaboration and deep trust building and working to really like collaborate is key. But the other side of that is that like we have to slow down. And I think that last panel was really speaking to this. Like to do deep collaborative work, we have to take a breath. We have to take time to build relationships based on trust, not on like producing KPIs. And so I think that's kind of my dual answer is, well, it's a triple answer, so I'm coming back to three. It's collaboration is key. It's about resourcing people who are already deeply engaged with the work or up for collaborating with people who are deeply engaged in the work. And if we can, trying to slow down, breathe, reflect, and then build that into how we're designing our future projects going forward.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
The answer that I had here actually was really wonderfully illustrated in the last panel. It was really lovely to hear people talking about trust in that space, and I mean that in a few different ways. In that, as I was saying earlier, there was a lot of trust placed in me to just have a bit of space and time to work it out, and to try and understand the value of the work, and that was really powerful, and it meant that the work was better as a result of it. There was the time that you were referring to, and the support and the resources were available for it as well. But then that same trust is the trust which we tried to build into Trailblazer. So lovely to hear you talk about it, Fozzie, of actually what does it look like alongside all of these wonderful pathfinders and kind of all the really unique funding opportunities within that. But what does it look like to have something at the complete other end of the spectrum, which had many of those hoops that people were jumping through for the other funding removed? Actually, what does it look like to have funding that wasn't necessarily linked to very specific outputs and outcomes, and outputs maybe, and kind of what does it look like to just give people the support they need to build the stuff that they're trying to build, and that required a lot of trust as well, and I think it paid off. It's my very biased, but it's my favourite bit of the programme, the Trailblazer. But then that also required trust within the partnership that we built. Actually, the arts organisation Watershed operates in a very different way to the universities, so there had to be trust between those partners and those organisations as well, that hey, it's all right that we can't point at something and it doesn't have bells and whistles on it and it's not flashing, and actually this small thing might be the most powerful thing that we can do, or actually the fact that somebody spent some time building a community and a network in a way that maybe you can't quantify and that you can't put it into the report in the way that you necessarily might normally do, that required trust in there as well. And I think that's something which went kind of threaded through this programme, I think, of working with researchers who might have never considered themselves researchers before, and going, hey, you're a researcher, whatever you produce at the end of this is going to be great. I know it because the questions that you're asking are great as well. Again, providing the support and the networks and things for that. And then the other one, I'm going with two, I think, is around, so to bring it back to inclusion in the practice and the framework, is that inclusion is not a zero-sum game. And that actually it's not an all or nothing thing, and that's what leads to overwhelm. You either feel like you're doing it all and you're doing it really amazingly, or you're just doing rubbish at it. And there's this whole bit in the middle, there's this whole bit of progress and honesty and transparency in that space. Trust the people that you're doing these things for, that they will see that you're doing things with a good intention, and then they will come on that journey with you, and people will give you grace. I think there's a relationship between being honest and the grace that people will give you for being honest, and the mistakes that you might make along the way for that as well. And if you can take that on board, it can be really freeing, and it leaves you the space to think about the great work that you could be doing rather than the stuff that maybe you're not.
Harry.
Wow. Just listening to you guys speak, I feel really fortunate to have been asked to chair this panel, because it's all starting to settle. I'm starting to see it. In that there's a really beautiful thing about you guys consenting to be invisible in the work that you do, and being real generous about sharing the ways that you do that. And I guess it's somewhat of another metric of this kind of program that might not necessarily be so obvious, but effectively we've got the coupling of the social justice and climate justice, and how they both rely on each other, in having Tony and Zoe on the panel, and then with you, Jill, it's about how do you resource those two really important things to effectively, this is a creative tech program, right? But effectively between the three of you, I'm telling you, like superheroes, man. You're like, but between the three of you, right, you're all tackling what are some of the real important issues that are so important to sustaining like life in general in a good way, as opposed to in a extractive way. So yeah, man, this is really cool. This is really, really cool. I'm going to ask one more question. I'm going to open it up to the floor, because I'd love to hear what the audience have been left with from listening to you speak. Now I have to choose the question. Okay, I'm going to ask this one, at the risk of like jeopardizing your IP. What question would you ask, and you can choose to speak to a tech startup, a funder, or a tech Goliath. Those can be your three audience, any one of those can be your audience. But what question would you ask them to consider if they came to you struggling to implement an element of the projects you've worked on?
I can go.
Yeah, man.
Yeah. So it's that question around kind of what are you trying to do? It's such a simple question, but it's always it's the first question in the framework actually. What are you trying to do? And people are looking at me, what do you mean? I know, but like, what are you trying to actually do? Not like, I know you've got a mission statement and that you've got values and that you've written some outputs into your, but like, what's your intention? That's the language of the framework, actually. What is your intention here? And we ask it in a few different ways in the framework. It gets asked in we used to ask it of ourselves, what are we as a partnership trying to do here? What's this project trying to achieve? And then also, what are the organisations within that partnership trying to do? And they might not be the same thing. And then there's another question in there about, what are you as individuals within that organisation trying to do, not in your job role, but also as people? Like, what motivates you towards the change that you're trying to make? But then that is coupled then with the question of, well, who is that for? And kind of those questions stump people really, really a lot. It surprised me how often that happens, actually. What are you trying to do and who are you trying to do it for? Is questions which I came into Bristol and Bath Creative R&D asking quite openly, and then was like, oh, maybe we don't have answers for these questions, and kind of really working those things out, because it's only once you've answered those questions, if you're trying to, what are you trying to do, who are you trying to do it for, and then what do those people need from you? And then that's then when you can start thinking about what your engagement opportunities look like, or what resources you have available and how are you packaging them. Resources are scarce to come by. We've all got access to different things at different levels of power, and our resources and the capacity that we have to shape those things as well. But like linking all of those things to each other, I think is really that's the starting point. What are you trying to do? Who are you trying to do it for? And what do those people need from you? And what resources do you have to meet those needs?
Good question.
I actually think in terms of climate stuff, you can just layer what Tony just said and just add climate on top of that. And I think that's actually probably quite a good approach if you're trying to not have your inclusion work over here and your climate work over here. They should be one and the same, complementing each other if you can. But I'm going to speak to the startup and the funder first, because I think we all get super overwhelmed by how much we need to change in terms of the way that we practice and the way that we do things, to just like baseline bring our carbon emissions down. And so like I would just say, a lot of the stuff in the work I've done is around permission giving, which is like you literally can't do everything at once. So pick what you think the biggest impact is and start with that. Like if you've got one person working on this and you're like a funding organisation, it's just like pick the one thing and start, and that's the same with the startup as well. With the tech giant, I think we need to have a little bit of a longer conversation.
Pay your tax.
Yeah, pay your taxes. What are your legal obligations? What are your legal obligations? So I'll probably just leave it at that.
Yeah, I'll double down on paying the tax, of course. So in the business development role I'd normally have, there would be a question around where's the money coming from. But I want to turn that around a little bit and sort of ask a question back to everyone else about the money that you have, that you decide where it goes, whether it's the money in your pocket or the money in your business. I wonder if you'd be interested in joining in on a couple of prototype propositions we've got for how we might finance people. So we've thought about 4 at the moment, just out of from a series of interviews with people. So we've got one idea that's like a community first, and it's a local fund that helps people like the people you've seen on the previous panel keep the value inside the business of what they're making, so that they can actually be more generative and can actually produce wealth and then be able to use that wealth locally. So we keep the wealth in the area and we keep the value in the business. Or we might have a different model that's kind of staggered for different moments of development, where different kinds of people, say you've had enough of Netflix for a few months, but you put your Netflix money into the first stage of this fund. Totally different idea. We might have businesses that want to put money into it. Or another one where we actually encourage businesses to think of what they do with the post-tax profits and what they can do with the power of that revenue that they can actually put into new things and stimulate more and more growth, whether it's within the sector you operate or whether it's within the kind of the geographical location or the issue that's important to you. There's lots of things we can do with sort of everyday cash, but also building that into some of the structures of how we're making business and how we're making money. One last one, if I can just have a little bit more time, is a model of like taking a proportion of grants and funds and windfalls that we get and putting those into another fund that we could then use. And again, we'd have proper fiscal regulations around it so that it was transparent, it was clear, decisions were made well, and that we actually had this pool rather than the scraping around for resources that I see that frankly breaks my heart.
That's exactly what I mean when I say, how are your resources meeting the needs of the people that you're trying to build towards? That's the business end of that conversation, and that's why it's great to work with you on it, Joe.
Absolute bars. I'd like to open up to any questions from the floor, and also if there are any questions online as well. No, not from online. No questions. Does that mean we can just carry on?
Or maybe it means thumbs down.
We'll have to go. Any thumbs downs? Yeah, that's your question.
Hi. Towards the start, Tony, you mentioned taking your toolkit and showcasing around various conferences and events, I think. Have you collectively interacted with the other creative clusters around the UK? Maybe shared the methods you've developed here, maybe learnt things from them?
Beyond.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So we ran a really great, it was the most camp workshop that we've ever done. It was theatre-based workshop all around.
Speed.
Yes, yeah. So we did it at Beyond for any of the clusters that came along there, and we've done some sharings with the HRC. So I've done a couple of quite short workshops with them, and kind of just sharing the language of the framework. I mean, the framework can. At the moment, currently working through the framework with Watershed as an organisation, and it's like a 6-month process that we're going through, but we've also shrunk it down to like an hour's worth of understand the language and the kind of the rhythm of it and some of the ideas that you can take out of it as well. The whole framework is Creative Commons, so it's all available on the website. Check it out. There is a user guide for it just to understand how the framework works, but there's also a full workshop guide and resources and things like that as well. So you are empowered to go and create manageable change of and for yourselves, but do come and have a chat with me about it as well if you want to.
Just briefly on the back of that. So briefly on the back of that, I was going to ask you in the bar, I'll ask you in public instead. It's the same thing. The same thing, but do it in the universities. So the people that have helped fund this, will be taking it back to local first-year students so that they can embed it into their practices.
That's a great idea, Susie. We should definitely talk about that. The universities are interested. We've got some early conversations on the go. I think we were, so that, I mean, it was a mammoth task getting the framework out of the door, and now that the dust has settled on it a bit, my eyes are going back towards how we take it back out into the world and what it looks like to facilitate this. My ideal long-term plan will be to run some train-the-trainer sessions around it and have people running it of and for themselves. It is just a series of questions at the end of the day, and it kind of very much relies on the experience of teams to plug in responses and answers to make it useful to themselves. That's always one of my challenges, make this work for you, and that's kind of what we're here for.
And if they pay for it, they pay it for you?
Absolutely, yeah.
Notice the hand come up here. Do we still have that question?
Yeah, I'm sort of formulating my head.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I've always been fascinated by the title, Bristol and Bath Creative R+D. It's a total mouthful. And I just wondered if there's a shorter title or more sort of a better title for the legacy of this programme. Any ideas?
I mean, we use hopeful futures a lot.
Yeah. So, I mean, we use the language of hopeful futures, and responsible innovation is a phrase that comes up a lot as well.
And hopeful finance in terms of these kinds of ideas that are coming out of this.
I wonder if anybody over there might have an answer to that question, actually.
I wasn't supposed to be put on the spot. No, I think what you said is absolutely accurate. Sometimes in project language you do get caught up in the particular names you give particular bits of the project or particular periods of production within a project and so on and so forth. So what we really want to take forward actually is the ideas, and actually, handily enough, Joe and I are going to say a little bit about that at the end of the day as well.
Segue.
Those
Stick
ideas
around.
that you take forward and how you point back to the legacy. that kind of matter. Yeah.
I don't actually have a question, but I just would like to ask somebody from Bath Spa or the studio at Bath to introduce the Counting House initiative in relation to Jill's conversation about kind of regional collaborative cooperative funding models. Anybody here who could speak to that? Because it's amazing. It's a great idea.
I've seen.
Yeah, so Counting House is a bit like a bridging loan. My knuckles will be so wrapped for saying that, but in essence that's what it means. There's a lot of funding that's not accessible to people because they don't have the sort of upfront cash in their accounts.
Totally.
So this is actually I know it's going to go ahead now, I can say that. So Counting House is a sort of way of supporting businesses, you know, to offer them that cash. It's lent by the university. The format of it is not quite sorted out yet, but does that make sense to everybody? It's sort of front loading basically the money, so you could go for bigger grants even though you don't have the cash in your account at that point.
It's such a critical thing. We've talked about it for years, so it's so amazing to see it actually happening. I can't, congratulate Counting House enough for making it happen. It's really brilliant. There's all sorts of tricks that kind of trip people up, like you spend the money first and then we'll pay you in the grant system, or also in combined funding where you have to go and get an investor and then you'll get the other half of in grant funding. And those things are absolutely untenable. So, that's every little bit of experimentation in this area is really, really, really valuable.
There's also subscription models that are being sort of bandied around at the moment and being developed, in sort of response to people pitching in basically to sort of, have a pot of money we're all talking about innovation, aren't we, in this room today, and those are new ways of doing that. Thank you. That's it.
Take a last question up top there.
Hello. I'm just curious about how it was evaluated, this whole project. There's been quite a lot of KPI bashing today, but it is important to measure how well things are going. And I particularly wondered if you had anything you did in terms of evaluation that was particularly effective, or any questions you asked that sparked a kind of really good response, or that really sort of got things moving around that?
Can you see us all madly pointing so that we don't have to answer this?
We're not the right people, but here's the right person. And Jack. Yeah.
Oh, the evaluation question. So before I was the director of B&B, I was the person nominally in charge of doing the evaluation stuff with my colleagues, Liz and Jack, who are also co-authors of the report. There's always KPI bashing, so key performance indicators, for those of you who don't know what that lovely three-word acronym is, three-letter acronym. And those are the things that are set by us, and by our funder, and by our funder's funder, and by our funder's funder. And those are the things that kind of set the framework for how you get to tell a story. So we had to report those firstly. So those were things like, what did we do now? Jobs created, how many connections people made, how many ongoing projects there were, money that we leveraged back out of the world, leveraged in kind, so for the money that we put in, what money came back out again. The answer to that was about 20 million quid, which is pretty good. And so there is that kind of transactional stuff that we have to take part in. And again, I will say this, I said this before, the actors have been incredibly good at kind of letting us kind of tell those stories, but also telling the other stories. And the other thing that we've always felt is that being able to tell a good story, case studies is the language in evaluation, but just telling the stories of what people have made and how they've made it and how it's changed their lives, and how it's changed their professional and personal lives. So you've heard, lots of different examples of that kind of stuff has been one thing. And Jack and Liz have done loads of interviews with loads of the people who are involved in the project to get those stories, and we have those stories. And the key thing for us as well is where you tell them. So we're telling them here, we're telling them in the report, we're going to academic conferences, professional conferences, we're having conversations with policymakers, and we're trying to find lots of different places to kind of stress that stuff. And the key thing is how you kind of balance the status quo, what people need to hear so they can leverage and understand the story of change you're telling, and also kind of start to seed those seeds of change, the questions that this panel has just been talking about, how you then kind of say, well, are you thinking about these things as well? And when they say, well, I guess so, but I don't really know. So, well, let me tell you a story, and you can tell the story of the amazing people that we've done that. So it's been a fairly traditional, like, methodological thing, surveys, interviews, chats, that kind of stuff. And it's also been a kind of a collective and very intentional means of storytelling that we've developed over the years that has to kind of fit those different parts of the pattern. And it's also all about, you know, it's also about having a kind of a resource you can showcase and share with people. So what I was going to say, and I'll say it now, what I was going to say later, is that there's the report, there's an online version of the report in that there are links to downloadable toolkits, so the toolkits that Tony's talked about, Zoe's talked about. Jill's work, there's blogs, there's publications, there's links to all the projects we funded, and lots of those have videos that tell their story. So spending time with that resource, if you're somebody who wants to kind of, you know, talk about this kind of work yourself or do this kind of work, also enables you to kind of embody some of that and share those things as well. So yes, evaluation, you know, I think I'll finish by saying the one thing that we've always wanted to do is, we often talk about key KPIs we believe in, key performance indicators we believe in, the metrics that we think, and it kind of goes to Paul's question at the beginning, like how and when do you need a metric to tell that story to get an audience? And how and when do you need to say, no, we're not going to have one of those. We're not going to try and put that in a box for you. You have to just accept that there are things that are valuable in this world that are intrinsically valuable. And if I can make you understand that and you can see how we can support that, then we can say, oh yeah, it also makes money, it also helps people make a living, but also we've left some positive change in the world. And that's one of the biggest shifts I think we have to make first, is towards just accepting that maybe I'll make a little bit less money, or I won't be the new Google thing that isn't going to happen, but I have changed myself and other people from doing that work. And I think that's the valuable thing about that storytelling. I'll get off my soapbox now.
I guess that's the end of this panel as well. So thank you all so much for sharing everything with us.
Thank you.
Yeah, man, I can't wait to see what more great stuff comes out of your brains and hearts. And thank you for listening and sharing this hour with us as well. So
thank you.
Hi, I'm back on my soapbox again. So Joe and I are here to present the award for Best Film and sharing the podium. So the first thing I'm going to do is I need to say some thanks to some people, because as you can imagine, with a project of this scale, there are so many people to thank. And if you look in the report, you'll see a list of the amazing team that have helped produce this project. However, I want to start with some thanks for today. So thank you for all of our panels, for our chairs, for our speakers. Thanks to John for making the film. Thank you, John. Studio Mothership, who are an excellent sort of Bristol-based creative design agency who have designed the report and designed the website that accompanies it. BSL interpreters, NSL for running the space, and Watershed events as well for everything there. And I also kind of then want to kind of move in to thank our project partners. So one of the things that we haven't really mentioned up front, because we're so used to saying, oh, we, Bristol and Bath Creative R+D, that very long-winded thing, but we is in fact University of the West of England, Watershed, then the universities of Bath, Spa and Bristol. There we go. And I think it's the first time the 4 universities have worked together in this way before, and it's been great. You know, and so when we say we, that's who we mean by we, the academics, the teams, the staff at Watershed and in those universities who've made this happen. So thank you to all of you. I wish I could name you all individually and say that kind of, say those names out loud. And thank you to our steering boards and our advisors and all parts of the creative community that have kind of made this kind of happen. I want to thank our funders, so the AHRC, who have been great, who have kind of channeled us this funding, kind of let us do as much as we can with it within the constraints that they've been set, and we've had a really healthy relationship with them, so we want to say thank you to them. We've also had support along the way from WECA, British Council, and I think that's kind of the funding bit. But most of all, the creative communities of Bristol and Bath. So the people, the makers, the audiences, that community. I mean, I thank you, because we've tried to do this in order to support you, because I think the work that you're doing is so incredibly valuable. Now, I said that I wasn't going to mention anybody particularly by name from our vast kind of list of amazing people that have come through our team over the last 5 years, but I do want to say a couple of particular thanks. One is obviously to John Dovey for directing this programme so amazingly, steering it through such challenging times as we have seen, from COVID to everything else. So I want to say a big thank you to John on behalf of the team. And I also want to say, both in terms of a big thank you in terms of her work kind of holding the project together, but also organising today as well and making today work so well, is Melissa Blackburn. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, so those are most of the thanks. There are more thanks. There's always more thanks. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So before I kind of hand over to Joe to open the envelope and announce the name of the award winner, I think what I mentioned just there about the kinds of the questions and the themes and the possibilities of the things that we see as the kind of legacy kind of taking forward. So I'm going to hand over to Joe to talk a little bit about the things that are kind of carrying on under, broadly speaking, this banner of kind of responsible innovation or responsible R&D that we've been talking about. You know, that's a couple of easy kind of phrases, but really it's about how you support people to change and make change in the world in ways that are conscientious and compassionate and think carefully about the impact of where their work might land. So that's kind of, I mean, this panel have summed that up really beautifully, but that's kind of what the frame, that's the umbrella under which it sits.
So we, as our partnership, we're thinking about immersive production and exhibition. We believe that embodied experiences can have a profound effect on people, engaging them with each other, their environment, and with stories in visceral and long-lasting ways. This can spark new forms of imagining, desperately needed in a divided and endangered planet. We know there's been a lot of investment in R&D in this area in recent years, and we believe that to realise that potential, artists still need access to tools, training and expertise for experimentation, support from producers who understand the field, better distribution routes and showcasing opportunities, and audience development that builds confidence and criticality into the immersive arts. We're also acting what role creative technology has to play in the just transition required by the climate crisis, a crisis that is unequally distributed along the same old power structures. How can we better connect the climate action networks to the creative technology networks that are so prevalent in our part of the world? This might not be about supporting flashy new technologies, but about understanding how the resources we have can be used in regenerative processes of small but systemic change. We're also super aware that artificial intelligence is creating a genuinely radical impact on the creative sectors. We want to support people to think about that and to experiment with AI, but to do so in a way that recognises that artificial intelligence is one of many forms of intelligence that exists, and that by collaborating carefully with these other minds, we might come into better, more compassionate relationships with them and with each other, than if we see AI just as a tool for economic efficiency.
Thank you. Yes, and you can kind of get from that sense that there are big questions, there's small questions, and then there's ways that we are collectively, as a partnership, but individually as organisations and researchers, kind of addressing those questions with the kinds of values and approaches that you've heard about today. There's one more kind of project that I kind of want to mention as well, which is called Fair Creative Economies, and that kind of encapsulates a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about, whether that's questions of growth, questions of economic growth and capitalism and all these things. It's very hard sometimes to kind of imagine a world other than the one that we currently exist in. So Fair Creative Economies is about trying to imagine alternative ways of organising, of doing creative work, of imagining what is valuable, of counting and accounting, and trying to support creative businesses, practitioners to kind of adapt and adopt and trial and experiment with some of those kinds of methods. And also think about the kinds of support that we might need from policymakers to support a kind of transition into those kinds of business models and those kinds of ways of being. So you may have heard things like donut economics and that kind of stuff. It's protecting, kind of collating some of those methodologies and methods and thinking what it really might mean for our ecosystems, kind of make some of the changes. And that project that takes in a slightly different direction is indebted to the work of Bristol and Bath Creative R+D as well. Before I forget, there are two dates for your diary that are, oh look, they're just there. Excellent. It's almost like we planned it. So Abigail Hunt, who's been was an artist in residence based in Bath Spa, who's kind of been documenting and mapping and exploring Bristol and Bath Creative R+D as a programme, is kind of running a sort of showcasing event, journey, travel. There's some flyers floating around for it, and that's on November the 15th. So please do sign up if you would like to get in that. And then Grounding Technologies, which is the project also funded by HSC and by DCMS, which Zoe spoke about. We've got public sharing day to tell everybody about the amazing work that that team has been doing on the 1st of December. And I can't think that there's anything else that I need to tell anybody other than thank you so much for coming. Please read the report, look at the website, explore the resources that we have and follow all those threads into the different places that they lead, and hopefully go away feeling a little bit hopeful about the fact that we are trying collectively to make a new space for amazing creative work to happen. And so with that, it's the best sentence of the day, so we'll see you in the bar.
Oh my goodness, there's music. Oh, I thought it was going to be music to play us off.
No,
and it was like an Oscars
It was.
moment.
It's music to tell us to get off the stage, isn't it?
We've been Bristol and Bath Creative R+D. Thank you very much.